This would be a great adventure for you, believe me.
Today I'm talking to Christian Spanik. He calls also himself Digital Saw, which is a play on digital dinosaur. So, hello Chris.
Hello, hi Jörg.
Great talking to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for your show. Thank you very much.
No problem. So we talk today because you are one of the digital dinosaurs, as to say. You were one of those German journalists who started a show in Germany which was called Neues, which is a German word for news, and we make it as a parted interview. So for the first part we start with how you actually got into journalism and how you got into computer journalism. Because you write on your homepage that you're not the typical nerd.
No, I'm not. I never coded one piece of program line or something like that, so I'm really not one of the typical nerds. And I never had a lot of fun in programming. I mean, I had to do it once when I wrote a book which is called Amiga, the Amiga book for Data Becker. And so I had to do some basic stuff. And I also did some basic coding for the C64 book I did with Hannes Rückheimer together. So, but both times I was forced to do it. It was not my free will. I'm not the kind of coder, programmer, something like that. I don't have any talent. If my mathematics teacher found out I earn money with computers, they didn't simply understand. The point I came to computers was only because of Hannes. Hannes Rückheimer was my partner at school. We were together on one desk. I don't know how you call it. It was my neighbor on my desk. And Hannes started playing around with computers. I was a writer. All the time when I had some spare time, I was writing. And one day Hannes came to me and told me that he had a great thing, which is it's more like a calculator, something like that, but you can type texts in them. Oh, this is great. So because I hated typewriters, because if you make novels and you write them on a typewriter, you always have to use this. At the time it was called Tipex. Don't know if you know that.
Yes.
Some liquid with which you can make a wrong character correct again. And so I hated typing and retyping that it looks fine on the manuscript. So Hannes told me about this great new thing he found which you can type in. I said, it's great, so I can write a book with it. And he said, not really a book. It's just enough for perhaps 3 pages. And I said, okay, and what happens after 3 pages? Oh, you have to delete them. I said, hey, what is it? That makes sense. But he was absolutely curious about the thing, and from that day on, he didn't stop telling me about the new computers, the new things he found, and the new stuff he liked. And so after a while, I get somehow influenced by him and looked at those machines. But I found out all the time, from my point of view, that I couldn't do the things which I wanted to do with machines. They always had restrictions, which I didn't like too much. And so Hannes was always the guy who was really programming. I was always the guy who was looking at it from a very distant perspective. But after a while, we found out we can do together a lot of things on computers.
So you mostly did things with him as a team.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is that Hannes also wrote. At that time he was drawing comics. So he had a big idol. This was Hergé, who was drawing Tim and Struppi, and a French comic. And Hannes also wrote and draw comics. So we had somehow things together, which is storytelling and having fun with characters and things like that. And so after a while, Hannes and me, we were starting to think about what can we do with that machines. And I remember one day, what was so funny, when Hannes invited me at his home and his, I don't know how to call a Kinderzimmer, a playroom, the place where the kid was staying in. So, and he invited me to come and to visit him. And that time he had a C64. And he said, I programmed something. You have to look at this. It's great. It's astonishing. I said, okay, good. I was coming to his home, and he showed me his C64 and a monitor was there with a TV set, and he said, no, sit back. And I laid back and said, lay back, wait a second. I laid back, waited, very interested what's happening now on that monitor, and then it happened. It was a dot, which came from the outer and I was sitting there and say, okay, great, Hannes, and what's coming next? I said, hey, that was it. And said, it was what? It was a simulation of a ball bouncing on the floor. Okay. I really was not so upset as Hannes, but after a while I understood what was the cruel thing about, because he showed me the listing, which goes over pages and pages and pages. A listing, for those who don't know what that is, it's the kind of program code, and you look in it and you see every program, every line of code you see, and it was hundreds of lines of code just to make a dot bouncing like a ball. And so I understood it was a big and enormous work he did, but it doesn't make too much sense for me. But after a while, we came to the point when we found out about sprites and peaks and pokes on the Z64 and things like that, which Hannes told me about. I said, hey, perhaps we can do a movie with it. And he said, doing a movie? Yeah, I said, you can have the sprites, you have little characters, and like how you call was a game with little people in the computer living? Little computer people, yes, could be. And there was a game like that, and I said, perhaps we can do some kind of movie in that way. And Hannes said, okay, we can try this. Okay, I make a script. So I wrote the first 5 pages of the script, which was saying you see a spaceship in the orbit around the Earth, and then suddenly a police spaceship came by, and they put them a fine because of wrong parking on the slot. And I just told it to Hannes. Said, hey, I can't do that. And I said, so how can we make a movie if you can't do that? I said, yeah, we have to do some smaller things. And so you see, after a while, we get nearer to each other. So I had my ideas, what I wanted to do, and Hannes had his clear ideas, what's really possible. And so after a while, we started writing books about computers, which was the C64 book, which was a big flop. But anyhow, it was a great book. And we also did a little kind of animation on a floppy disk, which was called The Movie to the Book, which was the only movie we ever did on a C64. And we gave that floppy disk in a copy to every bookstore who has our book and sold our book in order to make some promotion for it. But the funny thing is, I think from all the bookstores in Germany, I think 6 or 7 just really had that thing running because we're the only ones who had the C64. So you see, after a while, Hannes and me, we found how we can team up together and make things together, which after a while worked out very good, and after a while even very successful.
It sounds like you always expected more from the computer than it could at that time.
Yeah, I mean, if you come from a different perspective, and you remember the old days of computers, you find out that something is really true. In the beginning of computers, all people asked you, so, and what are you doing with it? And to be honest, we had no really good answer. Because there was no things like creativity software or something like that. You had to program everything by yourself. So you make a bouncing dot. And everybody said, hey, what's that for? Like me. And you said, that's great. But people didn't understand. So in the early days, everybody said, what the heck is this whole thing about? What should people do with a computer? And I mean, there are quite a lot of forecasts about the amount of computers we will have worldwide after a while. and there was about 10 computers worldwide will be enough, something like that. So, well, quite a lot of forecasts of people, of well-known people and people in the industry who couldn't imagine that everybody will have a computer on his desk, or like me now here, 5 or 6 computers on his desk, because they said, what for? They don't need it. And that has a lot of things, a lot to do with 2 points from my point of view. First point, the most of people who are working with computers were mathematical people coming out of mathematics, have fun on mathematics. And they didn't have an idea of creativity software. They just found this great math machine and liked it. And the other point was, we as hobbyists, like people in the homebrew computer club in Silicon Valley at that time, in a later Silicon Valley at that time, we just did things with it. And we were trying to find out what you can do with it. But honestly, we never could convince anybody of buying a thing like that who does not have the same idea and interest. So I always was the guy from the other side, from Hannes' perspective. I was always the guy from the other side, the guy who said, what for? And he was trying to convince me that it's a good idea. And because of that, I think we were a really good team. Because when we did things together, it was always for the people who first of all thought, computer, it's nothing for me. But we found a way, because of that team, of the idea of 2 people thinking different about computers, we found a way of making people understand why a computer is something you can really use and which is really fun and can even be useful after a while.
And nowadays nobody wants to miss his computer or his smartphone, which is also a computer.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, now nobody will miss that thing, but the point is that nobody could imagine what it will be. And to be honest, not everything which came out of playing around things and stuff we did is great. There's quite a lot of really ugly, bad things coming out of the whole idea of internet and computers and things like that. But we did not know that time. So we couldn't imagine the good side, the fun side, the interesting side. And I think we couldn't imagine the bad side. So after a while, the whole thing got its own dynamics, and we were just somehow a while spectators. We were looking at what's going on there. Who is doing what with computers and things like that. Remember 1999, 2000, the dotcom thing and all that stuff. I really did not understand what all those guys are earning so much money for. I simply didn't understand it.
You mean the dot-com bubble?
Yeah, right. And after a while, we found out, after the dot-com was a dot-com bubble, after a while, we found out that even the people who gave them money sometimes didn't understand what exactly these guys were doing and how they will earn money with it.
Well, there were some exceptions like Amazon, for example, or eBay, which actually survived the dot-com bubble.
Right. I mean, this is like, like the trains in the United States. There is a time when a lot of people give a lot of money in a certain idea. And it may be, and it happened that in the IT industry also, that you invested quite a lot of money, you never get out your money, but you made a railway. And so after a while, other people can earn money with it. So I think there are 2 parts which made computers so great they are now. One is idealism. A lot of people who just wanted to do things with it. Tim Berners-Lee. I mean, this guy never get money for the thing he invented. So from us, from the users, I mean. And on the other side, it was people who thought they can earn a lot of money with it, because quite a lot of misunderstandings, and they invested money. And those things together, money and idealism, in that special way of working together, those things made all that happening, which we are living in now, with the good and the bad side.
And what was which you said, now I want to do this for a living. Now I want to do journalism about computers. You said Hannah started it, and you started with books, but how did you actually start your career on television? I mean, I guess it probably wasn't like, bam, suddenly you are a known figure on the television or something.
No. Um, um, First thing I think is important. I think Hannes started something and I started something, and after a while we got together. That's also like computer industry. Somebody was inventing something like the mouse here, and the other one something like the internet there. And after a while, those guys get together, and something new came out. And I think with Hannes and me, it was the same. I was thinking about usage of computers, and Hannes was using computers and knowing about computers. So together, it was a special other thing. And what happened is, how did it get to a kind of career? It started with the day I left school, and I went to a advertising agency. So I'm one of those guys who you can see I was one of the guys who you can see in Mad Men or series like that. I was working in advertising industry, and one of my first clients was Apple Computer. That time with the Apple II. And then later on with Lisa and the Macintosh. And because of that, I kept on talking to Hannes because he knew much more about computers than me. And I went in the agency, Hannes stayed at school, and so I came back and we were still in discussions and were meeting together when I was back in Würzburg. And so one day I came again in Hannes' room. It was a teenager room, a typical teenager room. But the funny thing was Hannes didn't have any posters of some dancing stars or music stars. What he had was he had his C64 there, and he had a kind of two pieces of paper, and on that there were all the important peaks and pokes for the Commodore 64 on that. And he had it there for years. I saw that, and I didn't thought about it. But that day I came back working in an advertising agency for half a year. I looked at this piece of paper which was pinned on his wall and said, Hans, you know what? I think this is a poster. And he said, no, it's two pieces of paper. I said, yeah, but imagine if people like computer enthusiasts like you are working on a C64, they need this kind of sheets. I think quite a lot of them have something like that. But think about it as a poster, and you can grab it out of a magazine and you put it on your wall and you have it in front of you, and it's great. It's like you have in school, I don't know how you call it, a Spickzettel, something where you can look on when you do a test. You should not, but you can. And I said, if we make something like that and sell a magazine, I think this could be great. And Hans said, yeah, okay, let's try it. And so I had my first, let's say, marketing idea. And this marketing idea came up in the end to a big success in a magazine which was launched at that time. It was called Run, which was brand new, was about C64. And I sold them the idea for this poster. And they instantly got the idea and said, okay, let's do it. And you have to do a series in a magazine, about 5 or 6 issues. And you write about what is what peak, what is what poke. And so we thought about a title for the series. And at that time I read Nibble, which was an American computer magazine with a lot of stories in about Apple and Texas Instruments and things like that. And there was an ad about I don't know what, but it was you saw an Apple II, which was kind of small thing, and you saw a lot of plants growing out of the Apple II, and the headline says it's a jungle in there. And I said, yeah, it's true. It's a jungle in there. You don't know what is on which place on peak and what is what poke and things like that. It's a jungle in there. So we came to the idea, we call the series in German Das wilde Pokistan, which sounds like an adventure ride. And that's what we did. And it was an enormous success. So this was the first marketing thing we did. And because I pitched that idea 2 times. I pitched it first on Vogel Verlag in Würzburg, the idea of the poster, and they didn't get it. I mean, not the publisher, but the guy in the editorial office. He said, "I don't know. Nobody needs something like that." And so I said, "Okay, if you don't want it, we leave it." The publisher itself, Dr. Eckenkamp, was very sad that they didn't the idea, but he said, "Okay, if this guy says it's not worth it, so he must know. He's the expert." And so I pitched the idea again at Run, and they did it. And the success was great, and everybody now suddenly saw there is a need for things like that. And so Vogel Verlag called me up again and asked me, so can we do anything else except this kind of poster? And I said, yes, we can. We can do a kind of book. We can do a chip special, which was that time a very popular series of kind of books. And I said, we can do a peek and poke book where we put in all the peaks and pokes and say what is what and what it is good for and what can you do with it. And so we did this book. And this was, again, a huge success. And the funny thing is, this book came earlier than our first book we wrote, because this book we printed on a matrix printer, yeah. So it was printed on a dot matrix printer in the middle of the night in the hotel room, which was not funny for all the guys left and right trying to sleep in that room. It was printed on a barit paper, which is a special kind of paper, and we sent it directly to the printer, and they printed it, and then it came to the stores. And the other book was in a normal thing, which is called editorial office. It was typed by a setzer. I don't know how you call it in English. It's a guy who is doing the typesetting for a book in old times. And so it took much longer. It took on 1.5 years, that book to be printed. The other one took about half a year. So it was early in the market than our original first book. And again, it was a big success. So this was the start of making money, making a career in all that point of IT. And so we kept on writing books. And if you allow, I will tell you about coming to the Amiga.
Sure.
Because the Amiga was the original start of later on going to TV. Is it okay if I tell you that?
Sure. We have enough time. Still have some minutes.
So the C64 was a great machine, and we did books on it, and it was great, and we had fun, and everything was fine. But it was still a very limited machine. After a while, a lot of people were pimping up the machine and making it better and greater and bigger and whatever. But it was still the C64. And so because we were very successful in the C64 in the Commodore market, the former press chief officer of Commodore, Gerald Hahn, who was unfortunately dying a few months ago, invited me to meet him and talk to him about our plans and ideas. And so after a while, it was a kind of friendship, and he invited me at a Commodore fair in Frankfurt, which was a small fair. And behind the booth, so behind a curtain, it was the first showing in Germany, the unofficial showing of the Amiga 1000. And there was a lady, Gail Wellington, I think she was English, who presented this machine. And I was there because I was because of the advertising agency. I was located in Frankfurt. And I was there, and she showed things what this computer can do, like the Amiga bouncing ball, you perhaps remember, or some parts which should be later very famous as Defender of the Crown graphics, great graphics, movie graphics. And I was sitting saying, hey, that's it. That's the machine I ever dreamed of. That's the idea of making movies with a computer. This is great. This is wonderful. And so I was completely influenced by the presentation of Gail Wellington. And she, by the way, was somebody when you saw her, which is standing there in her skirt and her little business jacket and things like that, you had the feeling somehow she's just getting out of the kitchen, did some cooking for her kids, and now she's standing in front of the Amiga and showing you the Amiga, and then she's going back to the kitchen. That was your feeling from it. You were so near, so present, so normal, so down to earth, and all that things. But the machine was so outstanding. So it was great. So I came back and I called Hannes and said, Hannes, I saw that machine. I saw the machine, the ultimate machine. And he said, okay, Atari? I said, no, Amiga. I said, okay. I said, we should do books on the Amiga. And Hannes wasn't convinced. Hannes' goal was that time writing for the C64 magazine, because it was the biggest magazine of the C64 in the market. So he was not interested in doing something with the Amiga. And that is the reason why my first Amiga book, which came out, was a 49 D-Mark. It was D-Mark time, 49 D-Mark book, hardcover, with I think 32 color pages in it, which was completely outstanding at Data Becker that time, and I wrote it at Data Becker, with comics inside, and it was just trying to be a book who's telling people how much fun this machine is, and how great it is, and how to make things with it. And so my idea was, if I earn with that book only the money I need to buy an Amiga, which was about 5,000, 6,000 D-Mark at that time, with an US power supply, because there was no German power supply. If I only earn the money for the machine, to buy the machine, and if I only earn the money to buy some software with it, it would be great. I don't need more money. It's just because of that, and because the machine is so great. I want to be an ambassador of that machine. And so I wrote this book by my own, because Hannes didn't want to. That's about the second time I had to write some basic code to show people how to program BASIC on the Amiga. It was not good code, but it was enough to show people how BASIC works basically, not more than that. And if you have one of the rare first prints of that book, you can see in the front a line which is called Für Hannes, because I don't know how you call it. I donated this book to Hannes in kind of
dedicated.
Yes, right, thank you. I dedicated this book to Hannes because he wasn't with me, and I felt so sorry he wasn't with me, and I felt sorry for him because I had the feeling he missed something. And the funny thing is, at Data Becker, nobody believed in that book, because Dr. Achim Becker just were trying to catch me as an author, because he knew I had good how you call Auflage, I had good printing issues or good sales on my books, and he wanted me in his staff of authors. So he asked me for a while coming to Data Becker. I was before at Vogel Verlag, and I went to Düsseldorf for a living, because I changed from the advertising agency in Frankfurt to Düsseldorf, and so Dr. Becker invited me, and I visited him, and he talked to me about books and writing books, and he gave me a list with books. He got a lot of titles he wanted to make, and said to me, "You just have to decide which one you want to write, and you write it. And everyone will be a success." And I go through the list, and I looked at it, and I say everything: 64, CPC, from Schneider, and a lot of computers, but no Amiga. And I said, Dr. Becker, there's a machine missing. And he said, what? Which? I said, there's no book on the Amiga. He said, I thought you want to earn money. And I said, no, I don't want to earn money. I want to write a book about the Amiga. I am a copy texter or advertising writer for a living. I don't need to earn money with an Amiga book, but I want to write one. So if you want a book from me, it should be an Amiga book. And so he said, okay, write an Amiga book. It was the story of the first Amiga book I wrote at Data Becker, with the colors things in it and the comics. And because nobody really was interested in that book because everybody said it will be a flop anyhow. But after a while, perhaps he will do Atari books. And you have to know Dr. Achim Becker was very close to Jack Tramiel that time at Atari, and convinced that Atari ST. Yeah, he was. They were very close to both guys. They liked each other, and Jack and Dr. Achim Becker was friends somehow, as far as you can be friends in an industry. And he was so convinced about the Atari ST that this thing will crash everything else, and about Jack Tramiel, that he never thought about the Amiga anymore. So after a while, the book was working better and better and better. And the other thing was I organized a event at Data Becker at the store. He had a store in Düsseldorf. I organized an event, and I asked Commodore to make the presentation of the first saleable Amigas, Amigas you can buy at Data Becker in Düsseldorf. On the date when my book was published, was also be able to be bought. I organized an event where the first 5 Amigas in Germany were sold, and my book was sold. So it was a big event, and Commodore was here with all the heads of Commodore Germany and all the thing, and Dr. Achim Becker were there. And from that time, the feelings between Commodore and Data Becker was better. And I sold quite a lot of books, and everybody was astonished that so many people bought that book, and it kept on going. And so I had reprinted and all that stuff. And then it started with the Amiga 2000 book, which was in the next thing. The Amiga Basic book was first with Hannes together. And that time Hannes was on board again. He said, okay, you're right. Amiga is a great machine, and let's make things for it. So I was really glad that I didn't have to program more, because as I said, I'm not very good in programming. And so we started the whole series of Amiga books, which were incredible successful, and I think we were really leader of the gang in the Amiga books that days, and sold quite a lot of those books.
It's interesting how you say at the beginning people had to convince you in person, Hannes, and then it turned around and suddenly you had to convince people. So
yeah. It was funny because I think it was the point that the Amiga really triggered something in me because of all this graphics and sound thing, and I mean, nowadays you will laughing out loud if you see the bouncing ball. Yeah, it's nice because we see much better graphics. But that days, it was like the first Star Wars movie. When you said I was, I think 12 or 13 when I was sitting in a movie theater. And Star Wars started with the first, with the middle part of the sequel, first part of the middle part of the trilogy, and I was sitting there, and I heard the sound of the spaceship, and then you see this huge spaceship, and flying around above you, and you see every detail, and I was sitting there, wow, you wouldn't believe your eyes. Nowadays, that's not so good. But that days it was incredible. And the same thing with the Amiga. I saw that, that's a machine I can do movies with. That's a machine I can do creativity with. I really felt in love. I just can't say I felt in love. I wrote on the dinosaur on our website. I wrote a story about Amiga needed friends with 2-part story about this story. And I think it was really, I felt in love with Amiga and with the idea. Unfortunately, I never met Jay Miner and the guys, but it was an incredible moment. So I was suddenly an ambassador for Amiga and for Commodore, and so they helped me quite a lot after they found out what I do for the machine. And it was a great time. It was a great time for me. I think it was a good time for Amiga. I also think it was a great time for Hannes because we had a lot of fun with the machine and with the books about it. So I think, yeah, Amiga was something which convinced me from computers. And so I started convincing people about computers. You're right, it was a change.
Unfortunately, 9 years later, 94, Commodore went bankrupt.
The funny thing is, we still sold books, I think 3-4 years after Commodore was bankrupt. So still people were buying Amiga books at the time. To be honest, Hannes and me, because were asking about the commercial way of myself. Hannes and me were, after a while, on a point where it's okay, so what do we do next? And we decided to go to MS-DOS, and to the PC. And this is a part of the story where after a while, TV came in. What happened was we had those Amiga books, and we all the time wrote Amiga books with humor, with funny lines, with funny texts, with funny headlines, with graphics, with cartoons in it and things like that. And a guy from the German Handelsblatt, I don't know how, but he got one of our books in his hands. We didn't send it to him. I don't know if he asked it to Dr. Becker, but suddenly he got this book and he read it, and he made, I think, a half page of Handelsblatt about that book, and not about the book itself, about the idea of motivating people using computers. And he said, you know what? These guys who are doing this book did a great job in motivating people using computers. Unfortunately, to do it on the Amiga, they should do it on a PC, because we need motivators on that part too, because people don't like computers. They hate computers. And that's not a good idea. So it would be great if those were guys doing in the same way books about MS-DOS, about PCs. So, Gerald Hahn from Commodore called me up and said, hey, what did you pay the guys from Handelsblatt? I said, pay what? Why? There's half a page in Handelsblatt about your books. And, okay. So I went to the next newspaper stand and bought a Handelsblatt. And after I saw that there was really a half a page about us and about the book, I bought, I think, 10 issues of the Handelsblatt that day. I was so proud. It was so great. But after a while, I realized what he was saying. And I said, I think he's right. I have to use the kind of idea of writing, the kind of idea of explaining people computers for other computers, for harder to learn computers, for not so much fun computers. And so we started and went to Markt & Technik that days, because Dr. Becker was not the place where we can do MS-DOS books with other people who already were in that market, and the idea of our kind of book was not convincing to them. And we had we met a publisher, Günther Frank, who was a publisher at Markt & Technik. He said, if you have any idea, just came to us, I want to publish it. And so we started. It was somehow like with the first Amiga books, we started to make the MS-DOS books, the Einsteigen und Auszusteigen, which was the name of the series. It was an incredible success. I mean, we never thought that so much people would love to have funny books, in a very different way written books about PCs, because every PC book, we know that days were 3.1.2, the operating system, 3.1.2.3, and so on. You know, like a book in college or in a university, or like a kind of doctor's work. I don't know how you call it. So it was completely different, and we said, we love to write it, but we didn't know if people would love to read it. But they really loved to read it. And all in all, I think we sold about 6 to 8 million computer books in Germany. It was a huge success, not from all the books we did. It was a huge success with the Einsteigen und Auszusteigen on MS-DOS. So that brings us to the point where some people at TV came to the idea, asking me if I can write a TV show about Technik, a show for young people, for teenagers. It was called Technik 2000 at ZDF. And the guy who asked me was Klaus Möller, who was a editor at ZDF, who did that time Computer Corner, which was a kind of part in Technik 2000 about computers, about games, about new machines and things like that. And he asked me if I can do that, if I can put that also in right words. And I said, yeah, sure, I can. The only problem was I never wrote a TV script before, so I did not know how it looks like. So I asked him, sure, I can do that, but could you send me some of the old books, of the old manuscripts, because I have to see how the guy before did it, in a way how he speaks to the people and things like that. And it would be great if I can see that. The only point I wanted to see was, how is he formatting that? How does it look like? Does it look like a movie script, or is it different? How does it look like? It was the point how I came to the TV, and I started my TV career. It was behind the scenes, not on stage at the time.
I see. And actually, you started a bit later than other people who did TV shows. For example, Wolfgang Rudolph and Wolfgang Bach, who did WDR Computer Club. And I wonder, did you ever watch them too? Did you look at what the competition did before you started making your own show, the Neues show?
Not really in that way you're thinking perhaps about it. I mean, the point is, first things, I wrote this thing for ZDF about Technic. It wasn't about computers itself, it was about Technic. And that was a time when I started to work on my own. I was quitting at the agency. I was 1.5 years at Data Becker, and we're doing marketing, and was assistant to Dr. Achim Becker for 1.5 years. And then I went out and trying to do my own business, because I thought if I don't do it now, I will never do it. And if it doesn't work, a year later, I go back and go to some place where they will hire me. And so I was that time when I started doing TV, I was still a writer. I was never thinking about hosting a show or being in front of the camera. And so I was most of the time looking at movies and at series, because I wanted to write movies, so fictional stories. So I didn't look at all the computer magazines. But what happened with starting with the Technic 5000 thing, I was coming nearer and nearer to the computer industry because of the books also. And so after a while, there was more demand on people who can write about computers in TV, like it was some years before. And so I started writing about computers at WDR, which is a station in Germany, one of the big stations from the ARD. And those guys asked me for a show which was called High Score. High Score was a games show. And they wanted to change it because it wasn't too successful after a while. And so we changed it to a kind of computer magazine. It was hosted by Ute Welti, which is now a host at Deutschlandradio Kultur and Deutschlandfunk, I think. And she's a journalist, and she was the host of the show. And so it was first computer show I did was on WDR. And I think the guys from Computer Club were that time already airing. There were no competition to us because they were the same station, so they did a different thing. And competition that time was, for me, all the time competition was not what are doing the other computer programs. My question was, what is my time slot in the slots of the TV station? And the question was, what are the others doing at the same time? Because this was my competition. Because my idea was, I mean, remember, there was a time where people hardly have VHS recorders. Most of them didn't record programs. They were just looking at it. And it means they just can watch it when we were on air. There was no internet. There was no download or Mediatek or something like that. So my idea was, my competition is not another computer magazine. My competition is anything which is running on all the other stations that time. So I did not care about what they did. I mean, I saw what they did, but it was never thinking about a competition. They did a great job in the things they do. They did a great job in all the hardware things, because that was their, what you can see, they were really enthusiastic about hardware, about sensors who can find out if this card is red or black or yellow. These were things they were doing, programming and things like that. It was the biggest part of Computer Club that time on WDR. And I had, after a while, then the question about noise, it was 7:30 p.m., which was prime time airing. I mean, it was not 2015, but it was 1930 or 7:30 p.m. was prime time, was when all the big things starting, when the series were running and all that stuff. So my question was, what can I do to make a show on computers that bring people to the point to say, you know what? I didn't look now at ALF or whatever was running on the other programs. I will look at Neues the Computer Show, because these are interesting things. And that works out. So I didn't have the point to stare at the others, what they are doing, because they had completely different airtime. It was completely different and had nothing to do with us.
We have finished our, our 45 minutes, kind of. So I guess next time we can start talking a bit how it was for you to actually run a TV show and continue at that part.
You know what? I make a teaser though. Next time on the channel, you will see how Christian get involved in TV business and how he suddenly find himself in front of a TV camera. Ooh. Okay? So see you.